Hi everyone, welcome back to the IGCSE series of economics, and today we are going to be discussing the causes of a shift in the production possibility curve. Up until now, we have discussed about what production possibility curves are and the basics of what points under, on, and beyond the production possibility curve mean. Now what we are going to be discussing is what are the factors that cause a shift in the production possibility curve. Now remember this thing that a shift in the production possibility curve basically means that there is a movement of the entire production possibility curve, either an outward or an inward shift. An outward shift would basically mean that your economy has grown, which means that your productive capacity or your productive potential has increased. Now, what does productive potential means? Productive potential basically means that the maximum amount of both goods that you can produce using the resources have increased. And an outward shift would basically imply that your productive capacity or the your potential to produce goods and services has improved. Now, an outward shift would look something like this. For example, if we have a production possibility curve and we have good X and we have good Y. And let's suppose that this is our basic production possibility curve, and let's call this curve A. And let's say that we are producing some certain quantities of good X and good Y. Let's call them X1 and let's call them Y1. Now what happens is that due to some factors such as improvement in the quality and quantity of resources, we talked about these factors in the previous video. If you haven't watched that yet, go watch that video about how the quality and quantity of factors of production improve. Another reason for an outward shift is that your technology improves. If your technology improves, your productive capacity, your potential, and your capacity to produce goods and services improves. And it can also occur due to enhanced productivity as well. If you're able to produce goods and services more productively, that would mean that you're now able to produce more goods and services using the same amount of factors of production, and that would mean that your labor has become more efficient and your land, your capital has become more efficient in production, and therefore you will be able to produce more of both goods and services. In addition to that, long run economic growth, which we will study in macroeconomics, is another factor that causes an outward shift in the production possibility curve. So let's suppose that our production possibility curve shifts to this point now. Let's suppose that there is an outward shift, and now our production possibility curve goes to the curve number B. And now you can clearly see that now we are able to produce at a point that was previously unattainable. And at this point, let's suppose that now the economy is able to produce X2 and Y2 quantities of goods and of both goods. So that would mean that both the production of good X and good Y improves, that if there is an outward shift in the production possibility curve. On the contrary, if we talk about an inward shift in the production possibility curve would mean that your economy's productive potential has decreased, because now the economy is not able to produce the same amount of goods and services that it previously could. And these are due to some factors, which is decline in quantity and quality of resources, a technological regression, meaning that your technology is becoming outdated and your equipment is not up to the mark, and your equipment is becoming obsolete due to wear and tear. And in addition to that, natural disasters such as earthquakes, such as drought, such as famine also reduces your productive potential, and it leads to an inward shift in the PPC. And finally, if there is a situation of war, that also leads to an inward shift in the production possibility curve. So let's suppose that if we have an initial production possibility curve where we have good X and good Y, and let's suppose that this A is the initial production possibility boundary. And if we talk about the combinations that are currently being produced, let's say that the economy is producing at point B, where they are producing some certain quantities of good Y and good X. Due to these factors, and if an inward shift occurs, what will happen is that your production possibility curve will now shift inwards, and now you are not able to produce the same amount of goods and services that you previously could. Now you cannot produce beyond any point of this production possibility curve, and as a result what will happen is that the point that you were previously producing now becomes unattainable, because now you're not able to produce the same amount of goods and services that you previously could. So it now becomes unattainable. So that would mean that we will be producing now at a point, let's suppose C, which is below our previous outcome. So that means that the productive output of both goods and services reduce. And that is what an inward shift in PPC means. It means that inefficiencies in the economy have increased. There is an economic shrinkage rather than an economic expansion, and we'll talk about that in our next sessions as well. The next concept that you guys need to understand is what is the impact of producing more capital goods today. So for example, if we broadly categorize the goods that an economy can produce into two components, which are, let's suppose that we have capital goods and we have consumer goods. So now let's suppose that initially the economy was producing at this point where, let's suppose, 100 units of consumer goods were being produced and 50 units of capital goods were being produced. Now what will happen is if the economy today reallocates resources and comes down to this point and reduces the production of consumer goods today and increases the production of capital goods. Let's say that now consumer goods are being produced at 50 units and capital goods are being produced at 100. So today there would be a movement along the production possibility curve. But if we look at the long run impacts, in the long term what will happen is, since capital goods are also the factor of production capital, our productive capacity would increase, because that would mean that we are investing more on capital goods today. So in the future, so this is the production possibility curve of the future. So in future, what will happen is our production possibility curve will shift outwards if we allocate more resources to production of capital goods today. So if we produce more capital goods today, in the future, our production possibility curve will shift outwards. Finally, when we are talking about shifts in the production possibility curve, we also need to see a shift that favors only one goods. In economics, we call this a pivotal shift. When there is a pivotal shift in the PPC, or we can call this a biased technological change, then only the productive capacity of only one good will increase. What do I mean by that is, for example, if we have a production possibility curve where we have good X and we have good Y, and let's suppose that our initial production possibility curve is this, which is AA. Now, if there is a technological change that improves the productive capacity of only good X, then what will happen is that the production possibility curve would shift something like this, because now we can produce more of good X only using the resources, but we can produce the same amount of good Y. But that means that this technological change has a biased effect, because the shift favors only the production of one good, and we cannot produce more of both goods. In fact, we can only produce more of one good only. So that means it will lead to a pivotal shift in the PPC. And whenever you see such diagram in your exams, you guys should know that that it only favors one good, and the productive capacity to produce one good has risen, while the productive capacity to produce the other good has stayed the same. Thank you very much. I'll see you in the next class.